Who ruled the Shire? Was there a singular figure, or was there a council of elders? Or did everyone just do whatever the hell they liked? That is the topic of today's video. Hello and welcome to the channel. This is Gone with Gandalf, and today's video topic was kind of like suggested by, I'm very sorry if I mispronounced your name, Badania Bautic. So yes, you did actually request something about the Hobbits, so here we are. It's not exactly what you requested, but it's close enough. If you yourself, yes you that is watching this right now, if you have any other suggestions, then you can pop them down in the comments. However far we are in the future, then rest assured I do read all the comments, and I might be doing a video on that topic as well, so get on to it. Oh, and we do these lore videos every single Friday, so if you are interested in subscribing, then please do. So let's start off with, where was the Shire? The Shire was in the northwest of Middle-earth, in the region of Meriadoc. And by the time of the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbits had been there for quite a while. They actually went and settled the land in 1601 of the Third Age, but at this time it was actually part of the Kingdom of Arnor, and the Hobbits were willfully subjects of that king. The lands of the Shire were hunting grounds for the King of Arnor and his fellow nobles, and it was largely uninhabited, so it was totally fine for the Hobbits to go there, and they had quite the autonomous area there, and there was very little input, presumably, from the king. This almost went on for about 400 years, and in the year 1975, with the fall of Arnor and the defeat of the Witch King as well, then there was no one actually to govern the Hobbits. Now, this is where you see the first of the leaders and positions come available for the Hobbits, and they came upon a Thain, and the Thain was like a military leader, and they weren't elected, they would just so happen to be the leader of a great family. And the first guy that was to be the Thain of the Shire, or Chief of the Shire, was Booker of the Marish. However, there were very few battles ever in the Shire, so this title of Thain really meant very little, and all it meant was, well, it was kind of ceremonial title, and showed that that person was the head of that great family. And this great family was the Oldbucks, well, in the beginning. And the Oldbucks of the Marish, they would eventually, after 12 generations, they would actually move to Buckland, and the Oldbucks would become the Brandybucks of Buckland. The 13th Thain then was Isumbrus Tuck, and he obviously still remained in the Shire whilst the Oldbucks went to Buckland, which was just over the Brandywine River, by the way. It's not very far away at all. But Isumbrus I, he was of the Tuck clan, and from that point on, the Thainship would always be passed down the male heirs of the Tuck clan, and they would always, pretty much always, be the leader of that family as well. And just to give a date perspective on this, this was in the year 2340 of the Third Age, so still quite a long way ahead of the War of the Ring, which was in 3018. The 22nd Thain, Isengrim II, he actually had quite a significant rule, and he ruled up until the 2722nd year of the Third Age, and during his time then, they actually began the excavation of the Great Smeals, and the Great Smeals were a significant location in Tuckborough, which is where the Tuck clan presided, and it was like an underground, well, a hobbit hole, and it wasn't just any hobbit hole, it was great, and they had significant libraries there, particularly as you get into the Fourth Age, when you had like Pippin and others. They would start really documenting all like history and things like that. During this time as well is when pipeweed was first discovered in the Shire. Well, I say discovered, introduced is probably a better word. And then we can also relate this to the War of the Ring, or rather, the Lord of the Rings that we all know and love. And Peregrin Tuck, commonly known as just Pippin, obviously there's a clue in his name, Tuck, he would actually become the head of the Tuck clan, and also he would become the Thain of the Shire from the Fourth Age 13 to 63, so he'd have quite the long rule. But as I say, the Thain really didn't have much say in what went on, other than just what his own family did. As the head of the family, they presided over, well, the Tucks generally. They presided over Tuckland and Tuckborough and all that which they could take. So what about those Oldbucks, eh? Well, as I already alluded to that, they became the Brandybucks of Brandy Hall, and one of their names then was the Masters of Buckland or Masters of the Hall. It really doesn't really matter which one you kind of use, and they kind of ran the show then in Buckland, which is the narrow strip of land on the eastern side of the Brandywine River. So it's not technically part of the Shire, but it's kind of considered it, and it's nestled between the Brandywine River and the Old Forest. However, the Master of Bookland did also kind of rule the Marish, which is just on the other side of the river as well. And when I mean the other side, I mean the western side. And if anything, the Master of Bookland really had even less say in what goes on in the Shire, given the fact that he's not even the chief or like a military leader of folks in the Shire, as the Thain was. I suppose one of the most important things they might have to look at is when to trim the hedge, because of course the Old Forest can kind of come and attack them otherwise, and that did actually happen to the point where they'd go and trim the Old Forest all the way back so that they could actually see like the tree line quite far away, because otherwise they'd get a bit close and that would be very spooky. And again, one of our members of the Fellowship, they would become the Master of Buckland, and no points for guessing who it was. It was Meriadoc Brandybuck, or just Mary, and he would become the Master of Buckland in the year 4th Age 11 up until 63. Now you might notice that 63 is the same year as Pippin relinquished his Thainship as well, and that's because they would then travel off down south and go and see King Arnor before his passing, and then they'd go to Gondor as well, and that is actually where they died. As I said about autonomy earlier on, that everyone kind of looks after their own. So yes, you've got the Master of Buckland, but they look pretty much after the Brandybucks and just everyone in Buckland as well. And then you've got the Thain, and they just look after all the Tucks and whatever just lives in Tuckborough. Now, pretty much everywhere you'll have a family that might look after that region. Now, I wouldn't say like the Bagginses looked after all of Hobbiton or anything like that, but they were like the biggest landowner in that area, so even the regions of the Shire are autonomous within themselves. Having said that, there was a mayor, and there was the Mayor of Michel Delving. I don't know, it's spelt Mitchell, it could be said Michael or Mickle, I don't know. Michel Delving, that sounds about right. However, the Mayor of Michel Delving was actually an elected position, and Michel Delving was probably, you could call it the capital of the Shire. It's like the biggest settlement that they had, and it was way off in the West Farthing. I had to think about that one. If you were so lucky to win the election, you would get a 7-year term, and this was all, the election would take place during the Free Fair on the White Downs, which are also out in the West Farthing. Now, once again, this was rather a pompous job, quite a ceremonial job. Basically, you just go to banquets, eat food, shake hands with people, that kind of thing. Although you did also have to look after the post, and post was a very big thing in the Shire, and also then it was tied to the first Sheriffs position, and the Sheriffs were basically the police force. Will Whitfoot was the Mayor of Michel Delving during the War of the Ring, and he would be found later in prison because he was opposing the takeover from the Ruffians and Lotho, Sackville, Baggins and Sharkey / Saruman. And yeah, he was found by Frodo and co after they won the Battle of Bywater at the end of the Lord of the Rings. After a short deputisation by Frodo Baggins, Sam was actually elected to be the Mayor of Michel Delving, and this was in the year 6 of the 4th Age, and he was elected an unprecedented 7 times. That's 7 times 7, that's 49 years. Quick maths. So that was in the year 55 of the 4th Age, which is when he eventually relinquished his mayoral role. However, as you can tell by the descriptions of that role, as well as the Thainship as well as the Master of Bookland, you can really tell that there is not the most power given out at all. And I'll say it again, the Hobbits, they just do what they want. They just want to eat, and they get the post on time, and that's kind of it. Although, in the 4th Age, 15th year, Aragorn actually came up north, and he would then give special councillors of the North Kingdom titles to both the Master of Buckland, the Thain of the Tooks and of the Shire, and then the Mayor of Michel Delving. So that was Sam, and that was Merry, and that was Pippin. They were all given that special role, and obviously the North Kingdom is quite large. They are a part of the North Kingdom because that was part of Arnor of old. However, they were kind of, again, more of an autonomous region, and this was shown by the fact that Aragorn did not actually come into the Shire, and there was a special meeting then on the bridge of the Brandywine River, and it was henceforth declared that the Shire was for the Hobbits, and no big people were allowed to come in without consent. So that is quite special status given to the Hobbits as a whole, and a relative amount of pizzazz to each of these roles that we have already mentioned. And if I could just take an aside here and talk a little bit about the Hobbits in general and the Shire, it's very much akin to Victorian Britain. And in Victorian Britain, you had the class system, and the class system is pretty much you had the upper and you had the middle and then the working classes. Now the upper classes, they were the landowners. So if we look at those hobbits that we know, Frodo, Merry and Pippin, they are all landowners and they are all upper class. And then you had working class, someone that might work on the land or be a gardener, such as Sam. And just like Victorian Britain, they were very traditional, and even though the Kingdom of Arnor fell over 1,000 years before the events of the Lord of the Rings, they still had very much the same rule set, and they kept that tradition going with the belief that, oh, perhaps the king will return, and then we'll still have this. And why change something that isn't broken, I suppose, as well? That does also mean that there was no outright ruler of the Shire, and these, masters of the hall, Thains and mayors, they aren't kings. They are no substitute for kings. And as soon as the return of the king actually happened, all of a sudden, all of these guys, they're provincial governors. And they are all subjects of the king of the reunited kingdom once more. And that would be Aragorn. And this really is formalised then by him actually coming back and saying that you are now councillors of the North Kingdom, because nothing quite says that you are my underling than saying, hey, do you want to come and give me some advice every now and then? Also, I thought I'd just read this out because this is the last thing that Aragorn actually says to Peregrin Took. And he says, "Do not forget, Peregrin Took, that you are a knight of Gondor, and I do not release you from your service. You are now going on leave, but I may recall you, and remember, dear friends of the Shire, that my realm lies also in the north, and I shall come there one day." And that's kind of saying, like, yeah, you can go to the Shire, but it's really my land, so make sure you pay your tax. And just as a final aside, the Warden of the West March was also a new title given to Fastred of Greenholm and his family by Peregrin Took in the 4th Age 34. And the West March is the new strip of land that Aragorn gave to the Shire, and it was inhabited by the Fairbairns of Westmarch. And the Fairbairns were the descendants of Samwise Gamgee, and they would also have the Red Book heirloom then, the same Red Book that Bilbo and Frodo and Sam that they wrote in, although it would be lost. Alright, well there you have it. That was my summary, and that was the video on who rules the Shire. And just as a brief, even more brief summary, no one actually rules the Shire unless there's a king, and then the king rules it. But then if there is a king, then he doesn't really rule it, because so the Hobbits do whatever the hell they like, as I kind of already said. Although having said that, I hope that this was still enjoyable and that you learned something new. And as I said at the beginning of the video, if you do have any suggestions for next week's video, I will gladly hear them out. I've seen a few good ones from last week as well, and I've popped them down, but if anyone's got any new ones, then feel free to share. And lastly, do like and subscribe, because why not? It would make me happy anyway, and who doesn't want to make me happy? Basically no one. Although sincerely, thank you everyone who has subscribed, and thank you very much for continuing to watch my videos. It means a lot. But for now, everybody, I must go. It's very chilly in this conservatory. I'm going with Gandalf. Good day.